In this video, I'm going to be installing a transfer switch that will connect to my main AC breaker panel in my home. So this is going to provide 6 circuits that I can run in my house in the event of a power outage. I'm going to be powering this transfer switch with an Ecoflow solar generator. Now, if you've watched any of my other videos, you know that I build off-grid solar systems for vans and RVs. And in these systems, I use Victron components, modular components, a separate battery, separate inverter, solar charge controller, all the different parts. In fact, I've even done a video comparing Victron and the Ecoflow and explained why I prefer the Victron system. So you may be wondering, why would I choose to go with an Ecoflow here at my house? Well, make sure you stay till the end of this video and I'll explain exactly why. But let's get into this video and I'll show you exactly how I'm going to install this. So the first thing that I need to do is mount this transfer switch to the wall. I've already marked it and I'm going to be putting this into concrete, so I need to drill some holes. I'm going to be using these Tapcon screws, concrete screws for this, and these screws come with a drill bit. So first thing I'm going to do is drill in here. Now, I should have mentioned exactly why I'm putting it here. They supply you with this piece of conduit, and I pre-measured this that it reaches just right from here. So you just need to determine where you're going to knock out your electrical box. You could do it in this way, you can do it this way. I'm going to be doing it in the bottom, and so that's why I mounted it here. Now, a little bit about this transfer switch. You can get this transfer switch directly from Ecoflow. They've got a couple of different models, and I'll get into that in a minute. But you can also, they just use a Reliance transfer switch. You can order the Reliance version, and I found that it was a little bit cheaper, maybe $20 or $30 cheaper, exactly the same thing. So this transfer switch is for 2 legs of power. So you can see the plug that's going to go from my solar charger into this has 4 prongs. They do another one that only has 1 of these meters, and that uses a 3-prong, and that's going to supply the power on 1 leg. So you need to determine what the output is of your generator, whether it's a solar generator or a gas or diesel generator. It all works the same. I'm just basically going to use a generator cord from the solar generator into here. So my solar generator has the 4 prongs, which supplies 2 legs of 120 volt power, and so that's why I've used this one. But if your generator has 3 prongs and just puts out the 120 volts on 1 leg, then you would use the other version of this, and I'll link to both of these in the description. Okay, so the next thing that I need to do is run all of these wires. So I'm going to need to put all of these wires through the conduit. Make sure you get them all in there, feed them through. Now, it does supply these plastic bushings, so you need to make sure those are in there. And if you do cut this conduit, make sure that you take these out and put them back in where you cut it. And that just protects the wires from chafing or getting cut on this sharp end of the conduit. So I'm going to slide that back in. Then I'm going to pull all my wires through. And I'm just going to take off the cover because it's going to be easier to feed the wires up. Okay, so I'm going to make sure that bushing is seated all the way down in there. I'm just going to feed all the wires up through. And again, it's a bit of a tight squeeze, but they will fit. Now I'm just going to put the covers back on both sides. So now that I've got all the wires fed over here, I'm going to need to turn off the main power to my house so that this breaker panel is shut off. Now, this video is for demonstration purposes only. If you are not comfortable or have experience working with 120 volt electrical and breaker panels, then you should hire an electrician or get a friend who knows what they're doing, how to do this. But it's really very simple and straightforward. But you absolutely need to make sure that you've got the power shut off before you do this. Now, I've got the power shut off to my house. You may be wondering why it's light in here. I've got my Ecoflow powering a light so that I can see. Okay, so now that this is shut off, just check this. No power coming into the house at all. Okay, so here's the way that this works. They've got this, the white and the green. So the white and green are going to go to the neutral bus bar and the ground bus bar. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do is connect those. I've got a little bit more room on this side, so I'm going to run my white, kind of get an idea of how much room I need. There's an open one right about here. So I'm going to bring this, cut it right about there, and strip it back. And I'm going to run this, and I'm going to run it behind everything. I'm going to feed it up here. Okay, right there. I'm going to tighten that down. So the white's just going to go with all the other whites, which is the neutral bus bar. Okay, so then I've got to run my ground, and there is an open ground right up here. Let me cut that one, strip it back. Okay, so I've got those easy peasy, okay? Green with on the bus bar with all the other greens, white with the bus bar with all the whites. Now the next thing that you need to do is you need to figure out what you want to be able to run off of the solar generator. Now I've decided that number one priority is my furnace. I want to be able to run my furnace. Now I will say something about this transfer switch. This came with a 2-pole 20 amp breaker right here. So it would run 240 volts. So if you had something and you could switch out the 20 for a 30 amp. So if you wanted to run like a dryer or an air conditioner or something like that, as long as it uses 240 volts at 30 amps or less, you could combine A and B, these two positions, and run it off of that. Now, since this is an emergency setup for me, I want to just be able to run critical things to get by for a few days in the event of a power outage. So I took out the 2-pole 240 volt breaker and put in 220 amp 120 volts. So that gives me 6 spots. Otherwise, I would have just had the 240 and then 4 15 amp circuits. So I now have 4 15 amps and 2 20 amps. So I've identified that I want to run my furnace. I want to be able to run my refrigerator. I want to run some outlets in my kitchen, the lights in the kitchen, and then the lights and outlets in my family room, and then lights in my bedroom. And then we also have a basement with a family room. One of them will be to run that basement. So if someone is staying here with us, they'll have some plugs and some lights in that basement area. So once you've identified the breakers that you want to do, all you do is you take the black wire, is you disconnect the one. So for example, I know this is my furnace. I'm going to disconnect this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to connect this to one of these breakers. And these, it's really, really nice because these wires are all labeled. So this one says E. So I know this one goes to breaker E. And then there's a corresponding red one that says E on it. And I'll show you what we're going to do with the red ones in a few minutes. Now, I don't want to cut any of these that are going into my breakers, because if I ever wanted to take this transfer switch out or maybe decide to run something different, I want to be able this to reach back into the breaker. So I'm going to leave this just like it is. I'm going to put a WAGO connector. I love these connectors, really simple, a lot more secure and easier to take on and off than wire nuts. And so I'm going to be using those. And if you're interested in these, I will link to these in the description. Okay, so I'm going to run this off of C. So I need to identify which of these is C. That's B, A. Okay, so that one's C. I'm going to measure this out, leave a little bit extra, and I'm going to cut this off, strip it back, and then I'm just going to connect that to the WAGO. Okay, give it a tug, make sure those are all good. Now, the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take the red that is labeled C, which is this one, and I'm going to connect that into the breaker that I just disconnected. Okay, so I'm going to run this up. I'm going to put it into that same breaker, and I want to give that a good tug, make sure it's in there tight. Okay, so what this does, it allows the power to flow through this, through the transfer switch and back to the breaker. Okay, and it has settings. I can turn it off. I can switch it to line, which is the power coming from the grid. Line would be the grid, which is my normal power from the city. But if I want to run off my generator, I just flip it to the up position, and now it's going to bypass the grid, and the power is going to come from my Ecoflow, go through this breaker, and power the circuit that I've connected. So now you just want to go ahead and do the same thing with the other circuits that you've identified. Every time I grab these wires, the one I'm looking for is usually the last one that I find. I'm leaving these all just a little bit longer than they need to be, just so I've got a little bit of flexibility if I ever want to change or move anything in the future. So there's the one for my kitchen lights. Do the one for my family room lights. Okay, so you probably can't see this, but breakers C, D, E, and F are 15 amp. You can swap these out and put 20 amp, but what it comes with are 15 amp. So I've hooked 15 amp circuits to all of those. And the two over here where I pulled out the 2-pole breaker, I put two 20 amp breakers. So I'm going to run a couple of 20 amp circuits here, and this is going to be for my refrigerator in my kitchen and also for my plugs in my kitchen. And you can tell because the wires for A and B are a little bit bigger. All of the wires for these are 12 gauge. Yep, so these two are 10 gauge. So that's why you can run a 30 amps off of those if you need to. So that was A for my refrigerator. So then I'm going to just run this wire to that breaker. Okay, there we go. I've got them all hooked up. So I've got all these to line, which is the grid, and that's how I want all these set so that it works just as normal through the house. And then what I'll be able to do is in the event of a power outage, I can just come down and flip these to generator, and then they'll run off of my Ecoflow. Now, hopefully this video helped you if you're thinking about putting a transfer switch in your house. Now, I promised you if you stayed till the end, I'd tell you exactly why I'm using an Ecoflow and not building a component system out of Victron components like I normally do for our vans and RVs. And the reason for that is in a van or RV, I prefer to have a modular system because we have had situations where our customers are out on the road. We had one recently where a customer was in Alaska and his Orion, Victron Orion DC to DC charger, which controls the charging from his alternator to his batteries, that went out. And we were able to just, under warranty, send him a new one directly from our supplier, and he was able to just take it out and pop the new one in, and he was back on the road and able to charge his van. The other thing is, if one thing goes out, like for example your alternator charge controller, everything else still works. The inverter works, the solar charging works, the shore power works, and so if one part goes out, you can still use the rest of the system. With an all-in-one system, one of the big drawbacks is that if something goes out in that, you may have to send the whole thing back for service. Now, I don't mind that in my house, but in a van, I don't want that. I like the modular systems. But in my house, I just want a simple system that I can plug in. And also the other big reason that I went with this is if I needed to get out of town and have power, I can take that Ecoflow with me on the road. We have a second home in another city about 4 hours from here. And if I wanted to be able to go down to that house and take my Ecoflow with me, I could just unplug it from here and take it. The portability was a big thing for me, and also the simplicity. So I'm going to be doing another video very soon explaining the Ecoflow, the one that we chose, and why we chose that one, how we hook it up to this, and then also we've installed 900 watts of solar to charge that Ecoflow, and I'm going to show you how I did that. So please consider subscribing if you'd like to see that video or any other videos that we do on our channel. I'm Jeff, and I'll see you in the next video. Thrive on. See ya.